What's up, everybody? This is Tucker at MACkiteboarding, and today I'm going to talk with you a little bit about a new release from Duotone, new model wing called the Float. The name might give you a hint, but this wing is really designed for stability and luffing stability. Ideally when you're surfing. That's not the only thing it's good at, but primarily this is a wing designed to be ridden in the waves. I really optimized for that. So what's it do, or what's it supposed to do? What features does it have? We'll get into that right now. First off, we'll flip her over, start at the front here. Got a really nice handle here. It's relatively wide enough, big enough that you can get gloves on, booties, and get your hand in here quite easily, two hands even. And it's easy to grab, maneuver around. As compared to previous Duotone handles, this one's quite a bit stiffer, a little thicker here. So as you can tell, I'm really reefing on it. It's not moving much, especially side to side though. Gives you that stability to control the wing when it's luffing, when otherwise it might be wanting to rock back and forth and get gusted in certain areas. It really helps you to grip that wing tight, tell it where to go, where you want it, and then the wing will follow. Below that, we have a nice big neoprene knuckle guard here. So you're really maneuvering this wing around a lot. There's no seams, there's no Dacron to scratch your knuckles on. Got our leash attachment here. You might notice there's no leash on it. That is how it comes, with no leash. So be aware of that when you're purchasing it. On the bonus side, you don't pay for a leash you don't need or don't want. So you can pick out whichever leash you want to use on this, or maybe you already have one. You don't need to pay any more for that and have that waste. Next, we'll get into something that looks pretty exciting here, is a boom. So Duotone has moved to the handle system here where you can ride either handles or a boom on the unit. This wing is designed to be as light as possible, so it's only available with the boom. The boom is the lighter option. It also allows you to not have the additional attachment points in the middle of the strut there, which add quite a bit of weight, believe it or not, especially in terms of weight that you feel as you're maneuvering it around in the wind, because anything behind the leading edge is really what matters most. Anything behind the halfway point matters a lot. So that's something to keep in mind. What you don't get is this harness line here. I just have it on here from the last time I was using it, but I figured I'd show you for reference kind of where that wing is balanced off the harness line. It's about there. It's a little bit further forward, which is good for surfy handling and easy transition between powered riding and luffing off the front handle here. If you're familiar with Duotone, you'll be familiar with the inflation system here. We've got the Duotone airport valve right here, center of the wing. So love it or hate it, it is what it is. If you have a Duotone product, you will need a Duotone valve adapter to use this. Other brands aren't going to work. The hose end looks like it might work, it won't. You need a Duotone brand adapter or a WMFG valve kit that has the Duotone adapter on it, but ideally the Duotone one fits best with the little rubber washer thing to help seal it off. And this is something that you can kind of mess up the valve if you manhandle it. So handle this valve with care, read the manual on how to use it. You want to put it in, turn it quarter turn clockwise to pump it up. Don't overturn it because you can damage the valve doing that. We'll get into that more later, but it's something to be aware of. Secondly, we have dump valves here, 9mm needle style dump valves, old school. You want to dump quick, you pull those. There's one on the strut and the leading edge, and we have a one pump system, I should say, excuse me, with a clamp included. So you clamp that off while you go ride, unclamp it, and you pack it up and then go to pump it up next time. So we'll get into some of the inflation stuff later in my review portion, but that's what they look like. Next, we have the frame. So this is a traditional construction. It's a Dacron construction. I'm not quite sure on the spec on this, but it's a high quality Dacron. It's relatively stiff as compared to other Dacrons in the market. Same stuff on the strut and leading edge. So it's light, it's affordable, it's easy to repair. You know, it's a proven material, but it's not gonna be the absolute lightest, it's not gonna be the absolute stiffest. It's also not gonna be the absolute most expensive wing that you ever buy. So next we'll get into the canopy here. I'll flip this around so we can have a better look. But what we got here is a really nice laid out canopy. We do have two different types of canopy cloth here. Right here we have your traditional 3x3 ripstop in this yellow panel. And then down here in the gray, we have a micro 2x2. So that's a tighter pattern, but very stiff, very reliable, durable canopy. But both of these are also super light. So you get the lighter material up here in the yellow where there's less tension on that, and a little heavier weight material back here where wings tend to bag out. But they're also being really cognizant of the panel layouts and the reinforcements they're using there to really make sure this wing is durable and stiff, but also, you know, stand the test of time and keep it as light as possible. So there's some magic going on in the back end of this canopy, I would say. So we'll take a quick look at that. You might notice we've got our battens here. These are removable, replaceable. So if you do need to replace those, you can do that. Or if you're packing it down really, really super tiny for some reason and they're in your way, you can remove them and put them back in later. But those really help clean up the back end of the canopy, help reduce any flutter, and keep the trailing edge release as it kind of comes off this back 12 to 15 inches here, really calm. And that's really key to a stable luffing wing, so the wing's not crackling and catching wind in different ways and kind of flipping around, but also a quiet wing, so it's not overly loud while you're riding it. In the back little bit here, where you're typically going to see a heavier weight material, sometimes Dacron, what they're doing is keeping it a smaller panel and then going with that macro ripstop, which is extra stiff, but a lot lighter than what we typically use in the back end of the trailing edge there. Got a little wind here so you can kind of see it. It is super clean, and having that sort of radial cut on it with that taper in the panel just gives it a really smooth feedback and clean, efficient riding wing. But really, again, as I mentioned, from here back, that's where all the magic happens on these wings when they're luffing, when they're being stable and float. And then lastly, the support, as I mentioned. You know, you got the battens in here that really support that back end. You have the direct connection between the canopy and the strut right there, giving a lot of support. And then lastly, I don't know if you guys can see it or not. Let's see if I can give you a better look. If you look at the wingtip and the angle of that end of the wingtip, there's a slight twist. So it bends towards the rider just a little bit. What that does is it gives some little trim tabs, like on an airplane. It's going to help stabilize those wingtips so they're not rocking back and forth. They want to fly flat, and they want to point the nose up. So that gives you a lighter feeling wing. Look at this. One finger, I'm not even holding it really. And I'm in some really weird wind right now, but you can get the idea how stable this wing is and how it wants to self-right and self-balance. The other thing that does is it preloads the frame. So as I mentioned, this isn't a Lula. This isn't a crazy, crazy stiff frame. It's got a little bit of flex, especially once you get out towards the wingtips. That's a good thing for a smooth riding wing. It's also a good thing when you preload those wingtips, because as soon as the canopy catches tension, you're riding powered, then you've got kind of a pre-flex built into it, and it's snappier. You can imagine, you know, like a elastic band or a rubber band. You pull it, you know, the first little bit, there's not much resistance. But then once you get it stretched out a little bit more, there's more and more resistance. So when you preload that, and then it first starts to flex, it kind of settles into a stiffer position in your riding stance, and that gives you that better upwind ability, the better high-end range, and as I mentioned before, just that trim tab type stability when you're out there luffing the wing and allowing it to float as the model name would indicate. So how's the wing wind range wise? Well, it handles in a wide variety of winds quite well. I would say this wing is designed to be ridden maybe a little smaller than you typically would ride some wings. So you want to size it more like a grunty wing, not necessarily like a race wing, you know, where a 5 meter you're going to fly it to 35. You know, in 35 you're going to ride more like a 3.5 or a 4 a lot of times. In a wing like this, that's going to give you something with more appropriate power and an easier handling, because a lot of guys in the surf, the smaller is better. As long as you can get on foil, as long as you can stay upwind, you know, you really want to size down to make your handling easier, so you're not flipping around this big 5.5, you know, in high winds and the wings kind of manhandling you. I've been riding this 5.5 because we get a lot of light wind and that's what we had available. But realistically, more like a 4 or 4.5 for good conditions is more of my key wing on a model like this. Not to say that I'm upset about riding waves in lighter winds, but it is a little bigger for those high wind days, and then starts to get a little overpowered and less comfortable because it does have quite a bit of grunt. Look at, again, our panel here. You have that kind of forward foil section, quite deep. It's built for power for sure on the low end, but it's also quite tight. It's not so deep. The leading edge isn't so thick that it prevents it from being fun, that it prevents it from going fast. You can definitely ride this wing powered. In fact, I preferred this wing over the unit when I'm riding it overpowered. I think it's more stable. I think the power is a little bit more balanced and controllable than the unit, especially for waves. It's definitely more well behaved, in my opinion, in its wind range, but also expanding beyond its wind range. So it is a wing you can push a little bit. So if you're having the time of your life and you don't want to come in and grab another wing, or maybe you don't have another wing, you can continue to push it and be quite comfortable with it without feeling in danger or totally out of control, which is good. So I talked you through some of that. You kind of heard some of my opinions coming through, but we'll give you my formal review now. I think this is one of the better surf wings in the market at the moment. I think the option to go with the boom was interesting. I'm 100% on board with regard to the weight. Packability, it's hurt a little bit, but it packs down to about the size of the boom if you don't want to take it off. And that's really not too big of an issue. The bag is appropriate for that. So, you know, it doesn't really take up any more space in the rig. It's just a different shape. Additionally, especially on a 5.5 like this, it's pretty cool to be able to one hand fly the wing on a light day in small waves where you might need a little bit of a bump every once in a while, or you want to just cruise through a section to get through a better section. You can build some speed and do that, and it easily transitions between those and the really nice pistol grip surf handle or the leading edge handle here, depending on what you want to do with it. So having that boom is lighter. It allows that one-handed flying. And it'll keep the boom guys happy who may be coming from, you know, the slick or the unit with a boom, and they really want that. This provides it. So I'm pretty happy about the boom. I was a little skeptical at first because a lot of times surf wings are handles, but I'm really enjoying it, especially on this bigger size, which you can make use of one-handed flying a little bit more frequently than you would a smaller wing. I think they nailed it with the price and the construction, which is a hard thing to balance sometimes when you want maximum performance, but you also want to make it affordable and accessible to anyone that wants one. It's a lot more palatable to buy a quiver of these floats in the standard construction than they would be at over twice the price for a Lula. So I'm on board with that. Even for me as a higher performance, heavier rider, totally happy with the Dacron construction, which is cool. Might be interesting to see an SLS version of this at some point with a slight price bump, just to have the upgraded frame, which I tend to normally like. It's a little lighter, but maybe I'm pipe dreaming. Maybe simple is better, I don't know. Into the valves, I say this every time for Duotone. I'm not a fan of their valves. It's probably my least favorite in the industry, if we're being honest. It's just a little temperamental. I don't like that they don't include the valve adapters, especially when it's an item that is specific to their brand only. It's not a readily available thing at shops that don't carry duotones, so you're out of luck. My advice, if you're buying a wing, even if you already own one, buy another, put it on a keychain or something, because they get lost, things happen, and you can't go wing if you don't have that adapter. So that's a bit of a bummer. I'll also pick on our deflate ports like I typically do. Nothing against Duotone, it's just the way they do things. It's not horrendous, but as somebody, obviously, as you can tell from the icebergs, that rides in cold conditions, that rides on the snow, even when I'm not in the water, these valves are really, really problematic. When they get really cold, they're extra stiff. They don't seat properly, or if they are seated previously, which is what I end up doing a lot of times, then you can't get them out. You'll end up damaging the tab, you'll end up damaging the bladder if you're ripping on them too hard. So it's best if you're in really cold conditions, just leave these alone, inflate and deflate from the airport valve, even though it does take longer and you gotta kind of push the air out. That's better than messing with these things and damaging them, or not being able to get them seated properly and then having one blow loose on you while you're on the water. You don't want to do that. Personally, if we're going to make a suggestion to them, I'd love to see a more universal valve, ideally HP sup pump, because that's the most proven and widely used in and outside of the wind sports industry. Inflation valve for each, so that you can have independent pressures and fully independent safety inflation. If you forget to pinch this off and one goes bad, they both go dead. I personally find it simpler, lighter, more user-friendly. Just have 2 inflation valves. Don't worry about this and ripping that off and deflating your wing, or if you go to replace a bladder, all these different ports cost more money. They're more difficult to install. Anyway, I've gone on about it before. I wish they'd simplify that and bring it to a universal standard. That's really it. That's all I can say about the Float. Personally, I'm loving it in the surf. I'm loving it in free ride. If I'm in a racing scenario, it's probably not going to be my first choice, but it's fast enough that I can still probably be competitive with friends. So it's a great new addition to the Duotone lineup. I'm really happy to see that something other than the unit is entering the space as kind of that free ride surfy option, because the unit's the right choice for some people, but the Float's the right choice for others. And I would say people more dedicated to wave and higher performance riding are going to really, gravitate towards the Float. If y'all have any questions or you want to scoop one of these up at the shop, give us a call, jump on a website live chat, or you can just email us. This has been Tucker at MACkiteboarding. We'll see you next time.